McGurk! I love
Not
typing.
mess with my Google Docs, Meeksy.
Supergirl Radio is going live every night of the week. How do you like it? Is becoming a human burrito a plus or a minus? I don't know. It does seem snug.
I mean, they say you are what you eat.
Kira. I love that.
So I do a podcast called Supergirl Radio, and one of our segments is Lena Luthor, Boardroom or Ballroom, because of her outfit.
She looks like a boss in this coat.
Nasty Luthor like a different Luthor? It's not just Lena being mean?
No.
Helen Slater here. So fun to know that you're hosting a podcast called Supergirl Radio.
Welcome to Supergirl Radio, although for this episode of the podcast, we might as well be Superman Radio. But welcome to Supergirl Radio, your source for all things related to the CW Supergirl TV series and the character of Kara Zor-El. My name is Rebecca Johnson.
I'm Morgan Glennon.
And since the Flash movie, which is going to be featuring Supergirl, is close to being released in theaters and it's going to change all of our lives will never be the same. But since it's about to come out and it appears to be recreating some of the sequences from Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder. I like to say Zack Snyder's Man of Steel because, you know, Zack Snyder's Justice League is titled with his name in it. So I think really from here on out, he should just have all of his movies be Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead. Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Like, that's what I would do. I would just always like title my movies like Rebecca Johnson's Man of Steel. That's what I would do. But it is seemingly featuring some sequences or redoing or recreating some sequences for Man of Steel. And so I talked Morgan into rewatching it and talking about it with me because and to Morgan's credit, she is a very good friend. I just want everybody to know this. When I proposed this idea, she said, well, I didn't really like it, and I know you really like it, and I'd hate to like come with negative opinions about it.
I don't want to rain on anyone's parade.
But there's a difference between talking about it with Morgan than talking about it to trolls on the internet or on Twitter specifically. So there's quite a bit of difference there. So I don't mind a little disagreement as long as it's a fun and a good time was had by all. And we've disagreed about things in the past.
That's true.
So I don't think it's too much of a problem. So I am curious about your perspective on this film because we've never really talked about this one. I think we've sort of talked about Justice League
we haven't
a little
really,
bit,
yeah,
but not about this one in particular. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But before we get into talking about Man of Steel, we need to get to
the news.
Yes. Well, we have some very exciting news for you this time. On May 13th, Jaden Smith, yes, the Jaden Smith, tweeted, "The Flash just changed my life, WTF." And with a picture inside of a theater showing a Flash movie on the big screen. So
or a movie poster, I should have.
It
was a movie poster.
See, you see that Jaden he wasn't ready to have his life changed, and yet it was by this movie, and I think that's what we're looking forward to is sort of having like a pre the Flash movie, a post the Flash movie reality. I'm enjoying the pre times because I think that things are going to be very different in my life after we see this movie. As they are in Jaden's life now. And we're happy for him that he's gone through the transformation. We can't wait to go through it ourselves.
Can't wait to see what he's going to do now that his life has changed.
That his whole life has changed. But as he says, WTF, like he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for that to happen. He didn't expect it.
See, I think we have prepared ourselves.
We're more emotionally ready that like we're like, oh, it happened to Tom Cruise, it happened to Jaden, it happened to Dave Zaslav, who has no financial stake in how this movie does in any way. So I think we're ready for it to happen to us as well.
Yeah, so that's exciting. It does look like Jaden Smith got some sort of pre-screening or release date screening, so it seems like he did go see the film. So
Ooh.
I don't know how that happens, but I guess
I don't get it, but I guess I'm not a Smith, so
yeah, I think you have to be a Smith in order to
probably.
get so that's another um it's another example of someone being really hyped for this film, and so I don't know what I am to make of this, but
I have to say, I started out being very sarcastic about the amount of hype around this movie, and now I'm like, maybe it's gonna be a pretty good movie. I'm afraid that they're starting to bring me around now. Like, I'm afraid that, like, maybe Jaden was, like, the last nail in the coffin of my skepticism for this movie. Now I'm gonna go in and be like, "Rebecca, it's happening!" And Rebecca's gonna be like, "Please, what's happening to you?" What if it's like an invasion of the body snatchers situation, and, like, because I'm bought in, I'll, like, come out different?
Well, I just hope like people don't start like evaporating or something like
One
the
of us.
like,
One of us.
like, what if people like actually have like a physical transformation like the Flash, or maybe there's like some sort of mind control that happens in the
Ooh,
Flash.
it's like it's Warner Brothers Discovery's version of Myriad, and we all come out and we're like, "I loved The Flash. My
It's the
whole life is different.
the greatest movie of all time.
This is not a paid post."
Yeah, so Jaden seemed to really like it, so that's take it for how you want to take that. Okay, well, let's get into the discussion that we came here to have and talk about the film Man of Steel. I always have a hard time when I'm talking about Man of Steel because of my southern accent, like sticking out, and sometimes I say still. But Man of Steel, and so this is the HBO Max description, which I didn't realize they were still HBO Max. I thought they were just going to change to
I
Max.
thought it was just gonna be Max, but I appreciate. I'm gonna enjoy all the time I have with HBO Max before I lose. I have to start calling it Max, like I'm a character from Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, so their website still, like, I looked it up on the browser instead of on my phone. It still says HBO Max, so that's what I'm going to refer to it as. So here is the HBO Max description of Man of Steel. Quote, Clark Kent feels alienated by powers beyond anyone's imagination and soon discovers that having super abilities means making very difficult decisions. But when the world comes under attack, will he maintain peace or divide and conquer, unquote, which I think is a pretty bad description of
I had a question. So I wasn't sure if this was a copy and paste or if this was like the actual description. Shouldn't that last sentence have a question mark?
it might on HBO Max. It
Okay,
may have.
okay.
'Cause
I didn't want to judge Veronica, the description writer, too harshly.
That may not be a Veronica problem. That might have been a Rebecca typing fast problem.
That could happen.
Veronica did have a question mark, so I'm going to change it in the doc. Give Veronica the props for having the question mark at least.
These are the hard hitting questions that I will say. I took it very seriously. I want you to know that from the bottom of my heart. I took it very seriously. I made notes on my phone as I watched this fine film.
Wow.
It says Man of Steel notes. If anybody wanted to freeze frame, you can see some of my fun notes. They're not that exciting. There's one that just says, forgot how much Jonathan kind of sucks. Typical Jonathan Kent. So some things change, some things stay the same, baby.
Okay, now that's a good one to start with because I'm very interested in your perspective. So why do you think Jonathan Kent, not necessarily just a Man of Steel, but like in general, do you think that's across the board? Like Jonathan Kent is the worst?
I won't
so
say
why?
in every telling. I will say some of this is judged by the many, many years I spent in the Smallville salt mines, where their version of Jonathan Kent just like wasn't the best. He would have a good moment and then he would have like a terrible moment, and you'd be like, I just don't know where you jumped from like A to B. Jonathan Kent in Smallville had like precognition abilities where he just like knew people were going to be evil based on their comic book counterparts and would treat them accordingly, despite the fact that they had given him like no indication of like what they were like. So he was super mean to Lex for like no reason whatsoever, pretty much, like, the whole time, and, like, Lex would be like, "I got your son a car," and he'd be like, "My son doesn't need a car. He's this donkey he's been riding is fine." It'd just be, like, wild stuff, and so, he also sort of shares the Man of Steel version's thought process, which is that, like, people, you can't trust them,
Right.
and, people, they be sneaky, and that you have to hide
Right.
your abilities, and just the way that they and this was a Smallville problem too, is that they would go so over the top in, like, making sure nobody could find out Clark's abilities that they would do stuff that was, like, kind of messed up. So, like, in Smallville, for instance, spoiler alert, but, like, they fully let Lex think that he was, like, going crazy for, like, several episodes, like, just left him in an actual mental institution because they were like, Clark, you could just get your good friend who is, again, giving you, like, multiple cars. You could get him out by being like, "I believe in you."
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, can you trust him? Can you, Clark? And he'd be like, "I don't know, I can't." And then in this movie, he saves, like, a bus full of kids, and Jonathan Kent goes, "I mean, you might have maybe you should have just let him drown." My favorite, 'cause Clark goes like, "What was I supposed to do? Let him drown?" Jonathan takes a moment, he goes, "Maybe. Maybe, Dad."
Well so there is a lot of controversy around that statement, and I can understand why
But I
people
will
have such
say,
a
to me
visceral reaction to
to
it.
me, that felt character correct for Jonathan Kent. Like, I watched, like, 5 seasons of that guy, and that guy would have absolutely said maybe in any scenario in which, like, Clark could have possibly exposed his power. So, like, in a way, it was like putting on, like, a warm blanket. I was like, "Ah, yes, Jonathan, just like you always were."
Yeah, there are actually a lot of similarities to, Smallville's Jonathan Kent and Man of Steel's Jonathan Kent, to your point, because they both fear the government coming and taking Clark, and, so that is why they're so protective of his powers and his, secret, and, so I understand why people, judge the Man of Steel version because of the maybe comment, but I think the screenwriting is trying to get you to the point of the ending. So that conversation, in my opinion, sets up the ending between Superman and General Zod, where he has to let him die. He has to kill him. So there's that question that, and I think it's a good question to pose for Superman because, like we talk about all the time with Supergirl, like Superman can save a lot of people, but should he or can he save everyone? So I think there's a philosophical question to be had about who do you save, and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice takes that even farther in terms of like anytime Superman saves somebody, he's choosing who to save and who not to save. And so I think that question is really people don't want to think about that with Superman. I think
I
that's
mean,
the problem with Man of Steel is people don't want to have to think about like, oh, maybe he shouldn't or maybe he shouldn't do that because he needs to go over there and do that. I don't think people want to.
I think the problem with all superheroes is that if you think about them a little bit too much, you're like, well, like, when Carr is at work and, like, somebody's in a burning building around the globe, like, does she just go and save them, or does she sometimes, like, "Oh, I gotta go to that big meeting?" Like, I mean, the problem is, like, either you would be literally saving people every second of your life, not sleeping and probably going insane,
Yeah.
or at some point you have to, like, make some decisions about, like, "Well, I need to sleep sometimes, sorry, earthquake," like,
Yeah.
I think it's not usually in superhero medium because it's pretty dark, honestly. It's like you wanna kinda glaze over that stuff and not think too hard about it because to your point, you're like, yeah, of course, they're always gonna be making choices about who they can save and who they can't, and obviously, even though they're aliens, they're, like, human beings to a certain perspective, and, like, they can't just be, you know, s constantly flying around the world saving everybody 24/7. It's, like, not doable. But I thought that the Jonathan Kent stuff was interesting. I didn't, like, really have a problem with it so much because again, maybe people have I feel like people probably had a big problem with, oh my God, Jonathan was so terrible. And I'm like, you, sir, have not watched Smallville.
They have a Norman Rockwell
character
version
correct.
of Jonathan
Character
Kent.
correct. But I also thought it kind of pulled back to this idea of like Clark early in the movie kind of doesn't trust people because of what he got from Jonathan. So like at the end of the movie when he has come out and he is trusting people, that's like a character journey that he's been on.
Yeah. Yeah, he actually gets to the point where he opens himself up to Lois. He makes friends with the people in the military. He gets a job. He has a steady
Yeah.
job instead of just going around the world.
Instead of just wandering, saving people and sometimes messing up a truck.
Which also is something that comes out of Smallville. I think it's from the Smallville. Is it from the pilot? When he messes up that kid's car at the dance? It's
It might
in
be.
season 1. Like that's very close to the Smallville version of Clark as well.
They do have quite a few Smallville call-outs in this movie, which I remember noticing back in 2013 and also notice now. Like they meant Lana is in that bus.
Yep.
She's like the nice girl that kind of like looks over at him. She does not at any point whisper about secrets or lies, so I wasn't quite sure it was her. But it would have been great if she was like, "Is this a secret?" And that's how he got his first girlfriend. But Pete Ross is also in this.
He's a bully.
He's a bully, which is very different than the Pete that we saw in Smallville. No Chloe, but they do have like a fight in front of a Sullivan's garage,
Right.
which feels like it was probably a Chloe Sullivan nod. So yeah, I liked seeing all the little, and they mention I think they mentioned Fordham, which was Whitney's last name.
That's supposed to be a nod to Whitney in season 1 of Smallville. Yeah, so if you're a Smallville fan, some of that stuff checks out. But
some of it checks out. Some of it's gonna feel real right, real familiar.
That's why I never understood why people I mean, there are a lot of criticisms about Jonathan Kent in this film, all of which I understand, but I don't agree with. Like, I think it's fine. But I think it's because I have seen the Smallville version, because a lot of the way that Jonathan handled those things on the show are just like the one from Kevin Costner. So I never understood the critique that, oh, he shouldn't have been so hard on him to, keep his secret. And I was like, that's exactly like Smallville's job.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were kind of coming into it from more of like the Christopher Reeve movies, or maybe even like the 90s Superman and Lois, where, if they mention Jonathan Kent, it's like in a more like, oh yeah, Jonathan Kent, like he's more lovable. Whereas the character in Smallville is a lot more mixed.
Yeah. He's kind of a tough, pricklier character. But I like Kevin Costner in this film. I think he did a really good job of playing the protective father and also trying to guide him. I thought everything he did was out of trying to help Clark get to the point where he was making decisions for himself about how to be Superman, because even to the line of, maybe Jonathan Kent doesn't know if he should save them or not. He's like, I don't know what the situation is. So maybe there is a question.
I don't know which of those kids in that bus was mean. Yeah, I think my only other Jonathan Kent criticism, and I'm sure this has come up a lot in like Man of Steel discussions, but I didn't love the way that they killed him.
The tornado.
I didn't love the tornado. I just kind of thought like one of the things I like about some of the tellings where Jonathan Kent like dies of a heart attack is it feels like Superman can do everything, but he can't stop like you from having a heart attack.
He can't super speed you to the hospital. I feel like he could.
He definitely could.
Now, I will say, sorry to interrupt you, but in the 1970s, when Superman the movie was made, there was less of a chance that you would survive a heart attack in that time in history. But today, people survive heart attacks all the time. I mean, Kevin Smith survived a heart attack, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So I was trying to look up the rates of heart attack
Yeah, I think sort of
survival.
like what I liked about the heart attack, which sounds terrible. Um, it's just like this idea that like Clark is this sort of all-powerful, Superman is this sort of all-powerful being, but like human mortality is not a thing that he has been able to figure out how to fix yet. And so like at some point, unfortunately, like we all get older, we all die, and like he maybe doesn't, right? Like he's Superman. So like the idea of like that's sort of his first brush with like mortality. Like I can't, no matter what I can do, I can like, I can fly and I can have heat vision, but I can't save somebody from dying from like natural causes. Whereas like the tornado, I understood what they were doing in saying like this is like the sacrifices that he's made to keep his secret under wraps. And so that makes sense for why he's held on to the secret for so long. It's like, well, if I get out there and start saving people, or if I like put my name out there, or if I do anything, like what did my dad die for? Like nothing, right? And I totally get that, but like I don't like the structure of it. It's like couldn't he have? It gets you into a place where you go, well, wait a minute, like couldn't he have just done this and this and this, and couldn't he have like snuck in some other way and then said that they got like blown away and then they like come limping back or something? Like, it opens up too many questions for me at least, where I start to like rewrite it like, oh, you could have done XYZ and this thing and this thing. And I got where they were going for. I just like I prefer the heart attack. It sounds amazing. I prefer it when he just dies of a heart attack.
Well, for me, I see it a little differently because Man of Steel, if you kind of go through it in terms of the writing and the characters, what I like about it is that Superman is uh, a representation of free will. The way he comes into being, the way he's born is not like the other Kryptonians where other Kryptonians are, sort of predestined to be a certain role in the culture, but because he is born of a natural birth, he has options and he can determine his own destiny. And so that comes up quite a bit within the film, is that he has to make these decisions and make these choices about whether or not to, stand proud in front of the human race or not. He has to constantly make these choices that only he can make. And what I think is really interesting about the Jonathan tornado thing is that, yeah, he could have run out and just super sped out there and grabbed his father and come back, and it would have all been fine. But Jonathan's making his own free will choice to protect his son's identity, his secret identity, because he realizes that his interactions with the people of Smallville, where they're all kind of suspicious and they're all kind of weird about, having this kid who can pull a bus out of the water. I think and I think people also miss the fact that Clark in that scene is supposed to be like a teenager. It's kind of not, it doesn't come across because
It's tough because
it's
Henry Cavill looks like Henry Cavill. My favorite is that like they're earlier in that scene, they're in the car and Henry Cavill, I think they tried to age him down, but like this is 10 years ago, so before de-aging technology was a thing, and even now de-aging technology is like medium at best. So they just kind of like mushed up his hair and had Henry Cavill go like, "You're not even my real dad,"
yeah.
which is like my favorite thing, like Henry Cavill acting like he's like 15 years old. But yeah, I think it is hard to gauge like, okay, this is like teenage Clark, because Henry Cavill just like looks like he was chiseled out of marble. Like every time the camera turns to him, it just like he just looks like a Roman god. He's like, "Oh yes, me." It's like, so you don't really get. I mean, and they had the, you know what? I hate to keep mentioning Smallville, but they had similar issues in Smallville, because they'd be like, "Oh, just little old me, Clark Kent. I'm just 14 years old," and like in comes like 30-year-old Tom Welling, like who's like a huge, muscular, very handsome man, and you're like, that's a grown adult man. I know what a grown adult man looks like. So you would like judge him by like grown adult man standards and not like 15-year-old standards. And it
Yeah.
would be like, shouldn't this adult man who has like a 401k know better than to do XYZ? And it's like, but I'm just 15.
Yeah, so I think if it was more clearly defined that like that's what I would probably try to do is make it more known that he was supposed to be like a teenager, early 20s, still kind of young. And so I think Jonathan was making his decision based on the fact that he probably thought that Clark wasn't ready, that the world wasn't ready. And so I think in that moment that's what he was thinking about. And I always thought it was in addition to that, and I guess to finish up my thought, like the fact that Clark, because he respects his father, he allows Jonathan to make that free will choice for himself. And so that's almost one of the things I think goes back to the idea of like Superman can't always save the day, or he can't prevent a heart attack or whatever, even though he totally could revive somebody from a heart attack or super speed them to the hospital. I don't think the heart attack thing really applies anymore. Um, but one thing he can't do is make somebody else's choices for them. He can't if he goes to the point where he's um disregarding somebody else's free will or forcing something on somebody, he ceases to be Superman, in my opinion. And that's kind of the problem when you get later on down the road in the Snyderverse with Darkseid and the anti-life equation, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I think that part of it is kind of interesting to me, just based on if you take it in the philosophy road, which I don't think a lot of people do. They're just like, oh, Jonathan Kent, tornado. But I think the idea of the free will aspect of the film, I think is really interesting to me. And the fact that Clark, in the scene, he's arguing with his father and he's like, you're not my real dad. And then at the end of it, he loves his father enough to respect him to, make that choice. So I don't know. I see why people have an issue with it. And I think there are some criticisms to it. But when I think about it in terms of like the thematics, the thematic elements of the film, I think it actually, there's a point to it.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting to have like I think the Jonathan Kent character, I think people again were expecting him to be, nice. But we know better. But I think like Jonathan Kent has a very negative, like very kind of like grim view of humanity. And I think it's interesting to see that like by the end of like Clark like starts out kind of sharing that, like, right, like his dad's telling him like, I can't trust these people, they'll do it. And we see a lot of examples of like, yeah, like people aren't great, like they probably would experiment on you. Like as soon as he gets to be Superman, like the first thing that they do is like take him in a room and like kidnap Lois Lane. But by the end of the movie, he like really does believe in humanity. He's kind of come around to the other side of being like, yeah, like people are terrible sometimes, but people are great sometimes, and I believe in them. And I think that is nice because we do start him and like, if he's following Jonathan Kent's footsteps in the beginning, he's just like not trusting people, and sort of by the end, he kind of gets to a place where he's like, yeah, I trust the people, and like he can even talk to like the military guys who wanted to arrest him and kind of have like a fun back and forth. It's like, this is fun for us, isn't it?
Yeah, his interactions with the military are pretty great. So I'm going to let you dictate this discussion, Morgan, because I'm very curious about your thoughts. So if you want to go to your notes, that's fine.
Sure.
Where since we talked about Jonathan, is there anywhere else you want to go?
Yeah, well, so what was really interesting for me is that I went to see this movie when it came out in 2013, which is somehow 10 years ago. And I got out of this movie and I said, wow, I hated that. I hated that so much. And I have never seen it again until last night when I was like, oh boy. I was like, and to be fair, I was like, listen, I'm tired. I don't really feel like doing this whole movie tonight. So I'm gonna I'll watch half and then I'll call it. I'll do something enjoyable and then I'll watch the other half tomorrow. and somehow I ended up watching the whole movie. So I think that is a testament to the fact that, like, I did kinda get pulled, like, it got later and later, and I was like, "Well, I mean, there's only, like, a half an hour left. I might as well just finish it now." But so it was funny how, like, some of my memories of the movie, once I saw it again, I was like, "Oh, okay." Because a big part of my memory of that movie was sort of the what I will call destruction porn of, like, the end of it.
Right.
And I remembered that being so much more of the movie than it actually was. I remembered it being like, "Oh my god, the whole movie is just people smashing through buildings and destroying a whole city, and, like, nobody really acknowledging that everybody destroyed a whole city." And it's really not that much of the movie. Like, the first hour of the movie, like, the first 20 minutes, I think, of the movie are on Krypton, which
Yeah,
I
it's
did
just
not.
Krypton.
You could have told me that I was watching a brand new movie, and I would have believed you. I had no memories of this whatsoever. I was like,
Of Krypton?
I was of Krypton, yeah. I was like, "Whoa, this is wild." Just watching a movie I had fully seen before going like, "Oh my god, what's gonna happen next?" I hope Russell Crowe makes it. Uh, so I will say that was great. And then, like, the other like, it doesn't really get into the main, like, hero versus bad guy plot of the movie until fully an hour into, like, the 2-hour, 20-minute movie. So I did not remember that at all. I was like, "Wow, there's a lot of, like, character stuff I did not remember being in this movie. Wow, Lois Lane is in this way more than I remembered it."
Yeah, oh, yeah.
The memories I did not have of this movie, it turns out, were many, and most of it, apparently I just, like, repressed it right down after I saw it the first
Well,
time.
that's so interesting that you say that because I've been a long believer of the fact that, and this is going to be something that I sort of try to think on more, is that with the Zack Snyder films, a lot of people watch it once, hate it, never revisit it. But when you revisit them multiple times, it gets better. They always get better on the rewatches. And I don't think people really understand that that happens. I know that that happens because I saw Man of Steel in the theaters 10 times and I saw BVS in the theaters 15 times. So I'm very familiar with the process of like having like letting a Zack Snyder film like wash over you multiple times. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting to hear that like like it was a rewatchable experience for you.
Yeah, it was super interesting because I do feel like when you give it a couple of years too, like rewatching it where you're not so close to having just seen it and like formed an like a an original opinion on it, and then you come back and you kind of revisit it, and I was like, I don't know, like things are different, times are different. Maybe I've seen other movies that are like a little bit more like this. The superhero genre is a lot different in 2023 than it is in 2013. I think like tonally the movies are, a lot more different. There's a lot more of them just and I think maybe I was going into Man of Steel expecting a different kind of Superman. So like going into it remembering like what the movie I had seen and like kind of having an expectation of like what Superman was like in this movie, I think made it like a different viewing experience. I think I was going in looking for originally thinking it was going to be more of like a Smallville or more of a like this is like right after I think Smallville had ended like not that long
Yeah,
before.
it was yeah, maybe 2012? Might have
Yeah,
been like
like
a year before.
oh Jesus, like that show was on forever. Uh,
10 seasons.
and like maybe more of like a Christopher Reeve, like more of I don't know, like an upbeat Superman, and the Henry Cavill one is really he's not. We're kind of seeing him like as he's getting to a spot where he's like more established. This is like very much like an origin story for him. And so he's not like Christopher Reeve or even like Tom Welling. He's like it's a different take on the character. And I think going in knowing that now like allowed me to like enjoy the movie a lot more than I did the first time around where I was like, I don't think that's my Superman.
That's
So I
interesting.
yeah, and I think it is interesting. Like I think, you know, the, I one of the things I like about comic book stuff, even though the market is very saturated right now,
So
is that
saturated.
so saturated, is that like you can have a bunch of different takes on the character and no take is wrong, and people like some takes and people don't like other takes, and people take what version of the character you liked very seriously. But like, the fun thing about superhero comics, or like, things with long histories, is that you can kind of take it and tweak it and make it different. So yeah, like the Henry Cavill version is different than the Christopher Reeve version, is different than, Dean Cain or Tom Welling or later Tyler Hoechlin, all different Supermans. And like, that's chill. I think I was going in the first time expecting a little bit more of, I don't know, like maybe like a lighthearted Clark, and that's like not who we got in this movie. But I think going in the second time, going like, oh, I know what Henry Cavill's Superman is like, allowed me to be like, oh man, I didn't remember this Krypton stuff.
So let's talk about Krypton. I don't know if you have notes on Krypton.
I would love to talk about Krypton because I had questions about Krypton.
Oh, okay.
So my question is, my exact notes were Krypton sections, different, neat, interesting. No natural babies? I'm telling you, these are great notes.
So that's actually David S. Goyer took a lot of the inspiration for the screenwriting of this from the John Byrne Man of Steel comic series.
Thank you, because that was my big question, was like, it felt like something that had probably been in the comics, but not in something that I've read. So I was wondering where this idea of like a Kryptonese or whatever society, where like all babies have sort of like deterministic roles that they have to fill, and they all grow off of like a little like tree in the water or whatever, and then you just harvest your baby, and then you don't do it naturally. Because I thought that was really interesting. It's not a take on Krypton I remember, but it felt like something that was probably in the comics at some point.
Yeah, in those comics, there's no. I don't think they call it a Genesis Chamber. They might, but I think the Genesis Chamber name might. I'd have to go back and look. I don't know if they made that up, but they have more like in the comics. They're more like incubator type things that like sort of, for lack of a better term, like grow the children. But it's the same kind of idea. If you watch Sci-Fi's Krypton, they have something similar with that as well, like how they can sort of genetically manipulate their children to be kind of what they want them to be. So that I think that borrowed from the Man of Steel. There was a reboot in the 80s with John Byrne. So John Byrne came in and he sort of redid Superman's origin, and so a lot of this stuff comes from that. That's why also I think a lot of people had trouble with the Henry Cavill Superman, is because they were going into it thinking it was the Christopher Reeve Superman, which is more a reflection of the Silver Age Superman. So it was a different era of comics, which is what they had to pull from at the time they made the movie. But for Henry Cavill Superman, he's based on sort of the modern Bronze Age comic book version of Superman. And so that's a different take on the story, on the origin, on the character. So I think that's why people don't realize, like in the comics, there's a lot of different takes on Superman. And so I think that even when you hear they call him Kelex in Man of Steel, not like Kellex.
Oh yeah, I noticed that too. But I was like, my man's in here.
So Kelex calls Laura like Lady Laura, and they do that on Supergirl too, where Kelex calls her Lady Kara, and that is also taken from the John Byrne Man of Steel. If you read those comics, you'll see that the robots call them, Lady Laura and things like that, which I always thought was a really cute little touch, that they would have the robots like be so formal in how they addressed
That's so cute.
Lady Laura. So a lot of that's taken from the John Byrne Man of Steel series. So the Krypton stuff, I think even the way the Krypton, like the planet explodes, I think it's pretty faithful to that comic book adaptation. I'm curious, what did you think about the beast? The Haraka, I think, is the name of the beast that Jor-El rides.
Oh yeah, that was wild. I was like, whoa, wait, they've got like an avatar creature here. Yeah, no, I thought that was super interesting because again, like this, it felt like a very different Krypton, because we usually see Krypton as like hard sci-fi almost, and this was like more of a almost more of like a fantasy
Mm.
Krypton where they're like fantasy elements where it's like, yeah, and Jor-El has a like a dragon looking creature that he rides. Like I was like, hell yeah, he does. I'm in.
So, I guess, since we could go long on this, I could foresee myself talking about this for a long time, just like asking you, like, what did you think of this, and what did you think of this? But I want you to drive this discussion. So, were there any other thoughts about Krypton that you had?
No, I just really liked the Krypton stuff. I thought it was really cool. It was like a different version of Krypton than like I've seen in some other stuff, and even in some of the comics. I really liked the way that they talked about the society. I felt like even though the Krypton stuff was like maybe like the first 20 minutes and like it did like pull through the whole movie, but like I thought that like the world building was so good in that like first I could have spent most of the movie in Krypton and just been like, what's this guy's deal now? I love his little hat. What's going on?
Oh, you mean the High Council?
Yeah.
I love that the High Council, because they're portrayed as like these elitist people who think they're better than everybody, and I think it's very fitting that they have these big high hats that would sort of visually show that they are higher than other people.
Yeah, they were
Um,
like, "Oh, no, I don't know. I don't think the planet would ever blow up, sir."
Yeah, I think even with a lot of criticism thrown at the movie, I think most people like the Krypton sequence.
Yeah, the Krypton stuff is pretty great. I really liked it, and I thought like obviously like Russell Crowe is really great. Like casting Russell Crowe as your Jor-El is like pretty choice. Like
Yeah, he's
no
good.
notes. He's like an action adventure Jor-El. I love it.
Yeah, he's throwing punches in there.
Yeah, he is. He's getting in there. I also, as we're mentioning Krypton, like obviously all the love and all the flowers to Michael Shannon,
Oh,
who
he's so good.
he was like, I'm committed. I want a weird hairstyle. I want to scream a lot of my lines. I just want to scream them. That's what I feel is correct for Zod. And everybody was like, yeah, it is. He's a great General Zod. I really liked it. And I liked at the end of the movie where he goes like, my one purpose in life, because that's how they had been designed, right? Is they were supposed to do like a job. And my one job is to protect Krypton. And now there's no chance of that. So like
He says, "I have no purpose."
I have no purpose. And he was like, things are gonna get weird now. It's like whatever Michael Shannon wants to do, I'm there for.
Yeah, that's a really good speech that he gives, where he like pulls up the ground in his hands and lets
Mhm.
the sand sort of. Yeah, that's really good. Shannon's good in that one.
Yeah, he was great. Obviously, as you can see in my lower third, Lois Lane forever.
Forever.
Amy Adams, Lois Lane, top notch, all star. Superhero. I loved her. And it's funny because again, my memory of this movie was that there was a lot less of her in there. Like my memory was like, not enough Lois Lane. But it's apparent. I think that's just like a critique of everything that I ever read or watch about Superman. Not enough Lois Lane.
Yeah.
Because there is quite a lot of Lois Lane. Like she's just like in there from the beginning. I like I truly love the old school like Lois Lane, kind of like 90s, like Lois and Clark, like I'm mad at you because I like you, and like that kind of like back and forth. But I did think it was a kind of a fun take because like I can't watch the love triangle with the
Like
two people.
the love triangle for two.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah,
So
I hate it too.
I liked that like she like immediately was like, well, this fine young fellow who saved my life, he's probably an alien, and also he's real good looking, and I'm gonna have to find this guy. And like she knows who he is as soon as she meets him, and then at the end of the movie, I really love when he comes to work at the Daily Planet, and she just kind of smirks at him because she knows
She's
who
in
he
on the
is.
secret.
She got that guy hired because all his work experience is like is like trapping crabs and like felling logs and like Dexter in the forest stuff, and And I don't know where on his resume he has the chops to get a job at the Daily Planet. So I have to assume that like Lois Lane was
She
like,
pulled some strings.
I'm gonna pull some strings. Your resume is fictional. Just learn what it says. Like, I just imagine her going, and then where did you work? And he's like, yeah, that's when I was trapping crabs. And she's like, Clark, no. That's when you were working at the Smallville Tribune. She's like quizzing him on it. Come on, get in the game. Perry White's gonna see right through you.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, I really liked that where he smiles at her and she smiles at him and they're like in on it together. I was like, yeah, you guys are.
Yeah, I really liked the way that they sort of just threw the love triangle for two out the window. And
Love it.
I've heard get rid of it. It's not needed anymore. And I heard David S. Goyer one time talking in an interview about how the studio sort of fought them on that because they were like, well, that's the way it's always been. And he was like, but it doesn't have to be. And so I think that that's the first time that I know of that has ever been done. And I just enjoyed that so much because it made her, as Amy Adams has always said, made her part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that's usually an issue for Lois Lane is that typically she's part of the problem. And so in this go round, she's part of the solution. And I always love that, she's such a good reporter that she tracks an alien down to his mother's front door. That's pretty good.
And I love how they show her doing the legwork. It's not like it doesn't take a long time in the movie, but it's like systematically you see her talking to all these people that he had like interacted with in like little bits and pieces throughout the movie of like, here's this like waitress that he saved from like a mean customer, and here's this other person that he saved from like a helicopter fire or something. And she was like, okay, well, this person led me to this person, this person led me to this person, and this person led me to Martha Kent. Hello, Martha. like just like good old fashioned report. Like she's not doing anything like fancy or like out of left field. Like she's just like following clues until she gets to like where she needs to be. Which I thought was really cool. It kind of shows like what a good reporter she is and like what a good investigative reporter she is. And I really like Lois in this movie. She's like very active, where I think, as you mentioned, like sometimes she could be like, she was always getting into trouble. Lois Lane is my hero because she's just like always doing things she shouldn't be doing. And I relate to that. But like, in the past, like she gets herself usually in over her head pretty easily. And in this movie, like she does that like several times, obviously. She almost dies.
A couple of times.
But it feels like she's got it more together. She is helping out. She's like helping them figure out what they're going to do. She's like on that helicopter, like getting the solution to like the world, world engines.
The world
I wrote
engine.
it down.
Nice.
I knew I was gonna forget it. I was
I'm so
world
proud.
engine. So yeah, I really in fact, one of my notes is I like how involved Lois is in the action.
Yeah, she goes to space. She goes to space and
all the way to space.
Shoots Kryptonian weapons.
It's the best.
It's
yeah,
she gets, so the best.
Gets the little helmet on. I like how much the people were like, "Don't take it off or you'll die." She's like, "I'll do what I want." I also love that moment where the like hologram of Jor-El is like, look at me, I'm the captain now. I'm gonna tell you what to do. And she's like running through and he's like left and she's like, ugh. And my favorite is when she's getting into the pod and I can't remember the name of like the scary lady Kryptonian.
Yeah.
But she like Jor-El's like, well, it was like great meeting you, and also duck to the left. And she's like, what? And like a blade comes right through the hologram and she ducks just in time. It was really great. I was like, man, I could watch like a whole buddy comedy of Lois Lane and Jor-El, like where he's trying to tell her what to do and she's like not listening and he's like, I told you to the left. And she's like, who's left? Something like that. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that I'm sad that he says in the film something to the effect of, we probably won't ever meet again. And I'm like, I wish they would.
Bring him back.
That would be great.
Let's just throw up a hologram of Jor-El in every movie. Just in the background giving color commentary.
Well, I think it makes sense because he comes with the little key that was created at Kal-El's birth.
That's true.
So I think the fact that the Kryptonian technology is actually pretty interesting because it's sort of like the crystals in the Donnerverse, where like if you put the crystal in the thing, it does a thing.
Yeah.
So that little key is kind of like a key. Anytime you go to a Kryptonian ship, it sort of reads whatever's on there. And so the jor-el AI, I think that's actually really clever.
It was neat. Yeah, I liked the jor-el AI. I thought that was really cool, and obviously a great way to get him back in the movie a little bit later, doing stuff. If you got Russell Crowe, might as well use him. I did want to point out just that Christopher Maloney had a fun death. That was an actual part of my notes. Christopher Maloney had a fun death, but he did. I like that they foreshadowed it with the Kryptonian lady being like, I'll give you a death with honor or something.
A good death is its own reward.
That's right. And then at the end, he was like, "Well, I'm going down with this helicopter, but it's gonna be pretty sweet."
Yeah, he and Feora have a kind of a back and forth. Even that starts at the scene where Superman and Lois go into the ship with them in sort of the desert. Feora and his character are they butt heads quite a bit in the film. His code name, did you catch what his code name was?
I don't think so. Is it Stabler?
It's Guardian.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Yeah,
Stabler would have been very funny.
It's mentioned in the Smallville fight between the Kryptonians when the helicopter goes down.
Interesting. Oh, I like how they work the little comic book references in there. I thought that was cool. Yeah, so those were, I liked a lot of that stuff. Even still, like the destruction part towards the end, I got like a little bit of destruction fatigue. I was like, I know, I get it. They're destroying this building. They're destroying that building. There's probably a lot of people in there. That's a bummer. I like that you get like the on the ground scenes of like Perry White and Jenny, who he like nearly bites it. Really.
Yeah.
It would have been fun if Jenny was like a character that we knew from the comics, unless I'm mistaken. Like if that would have been like a Cat Grant or something. They're like, we gotta get Cat out.
No, Jenny is sort of, I think, just made up for the film. A lot of people think she's like the female Jimmy Olsen, which kind of she is. But she is just her own character. So they just brought in somebody new for the film.
I like the actress. I also I liked all the Daily Planet people. I thought Lawrence Fishburne was great. And then the guy whose name I always forget, who has been in everything, including House of Cards and Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, or Jack Clancy's Tom Arnold. I don't know. Mike and I have a joke with that show where we just change all the names like interchangeably. So now I like legitimately don't know what it's called. So sometimes I'll be like, "Oh yeah, do you want to watch like Tom Arnold's Jack Clancy?" And he'll know what I mean. But now I don't know what the actual show is called, which is a kind of a problem. I think it's Jack Ryan. But that actor is also in that. He's like great everywhere, and he doesn't have a big role in this, but I thought he was like, it was nice to have like somebody who's like got that good presence to be in those scenes where it, like, could have just been kind of anybody being like, no, we got to get Jenny out. But like, I think that like having it be like an actor I knew from somewhere made it more fun.
Yeah, his name is Michael Kelly.
There you go.
Right?
That seems right. Yeah. I feel like he's like one of I hate to say this about anybody because he's like a great actor, but he's like one of the that guy actors where like he's been in so many things that you're like, you know that guy.
Yeah, he plays Steve Lombard, who is typically a Daily Planet staff member, the sports guy. So he is a comic book character. So Jenny was the only one who was kind of a new character and not from the comics. But yeah, I really like the Daily Planet folks. There's even a small moment when Lois comes back to the Daily Planet and Steve Lombard sees her coming in and he's like, "Oh, Perry's gunning for you, Lois." Like they have this like real kind of like back and forth that I think is, a small bit of comedy that I laugh at.
And he tries to ask her out, and she's like, "No." And then he tries to ask Jenny out, and she's like, "No." And I felt bad for him. I was like, "Oh, he's striking out everywhere." Your competition is Henry Cavill. It's not gonna go well for you.
Yeah, they could have maybe been a little nicer to him after everything went down in
Just a
Metropolis.
bit. He almost
Yeah.
died trying to get you out of that rubble, Jenny.
Jenny could have been
She
nicer.
could have let him down a little bit easier. Although he was a creep trying to do that at work, so maybe it
Well,
was justified.
They were trying to be playful with him, I think.
Yeah, I thought the Daily Planet crew was pretty fun. What else about the movie? Yeah, I mentioned that I like the twist of Lois already knowing Clark. I had that in my notes. Would have loved would have loved a movie with Clark and Lois actually in the planet. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I was like ready for that spinoff. I think one of my critiques overall is that, like, I wish that before Batman v Superman there had been like a second Man of Steel movie, like a second Superman movie where like they got to do Daily Planet stuff and they got to, like, I don't know. I just wanted to see more of them in that, like, now that we did the origin story, like, now is the time for his second movie to be about something, a different thing, and like he's in his like more traditional role, and then like we kind of went right from that into a team up movie. And then he never got his like second movie. So like I really wanted to see the Clark and Lois at the Daily Planet like bantering and stuff like that. I was like that's my kind of stuff. I'm like, come on, get in there and like, fight over assignments and
Yeah, I think that's something I would have wanted to see too. I wish we had gotten, a chance to expand some of that. Unfortunately, because of the way things went down, the the arc of everything got cut off at the knees. But I think you see a little bit of that in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, where Clark is at the Daily Planet. Like, some of my favorite bits in that film are Perry like nagging Clark about, "Hey, where's this sports article? You're supposed to write this sports article." And he's like, I'm trying to figure out who this Batman guy is. Stop messing with me." So you see a little bit, it's obviously a little more serious in tone, just because there's some serious stuff going on in that film. But there's the Perry White stuff in BBS is actually really funny. And so there is a little bit of that there. But I mean, I agree. I wish there had been, another film that was just Clark and Lois. I would have been all about that.
Yeah, I think from where I was standing and back in like whatever 2013, it seemed to me like WB desperately wanted their own version of Avengers, and they wanted it so badly that they didn't realize that like the reason that the Marvel thing worked was because they like did one movie and they did another movie and they did another movie, and then they started to connect those movies like little bits at a time, but like everybody got introduced before they got their big team up movie. And WB was like, okay, we've got one good movie, we got one successful movie, let's go right to the team up. And I was like, what? We haven't even met this Batman. So it was, yeah, I think that the WB, because they were in such a hurry to like get their own Marvel magic, they didn't care to do the legwork involved, and that like made it feel, some of these movies feel like a little rushed in terms of like, I would like to get to know these characters a little bit more before they're doing like a big, world ending thing. Like give me the Batman solo movie, give me like the second Superman movie where he's like just on his own hanging out with Lois Lane, like then we can do the team up movie where they're fighting. But like I don't, they had the Batman v Superman had to do so much work to like, this is Bruce Wayne and this is who he is and this is like where he's coming from and we have to establish him. And then it had to take a couple breaks in between to be like, the Flash is coming, so this is Wonder Woman, and then like get back into the story. And it was like, it was, I don't know, I felt bad. I was like, just let it be the movie that it's supposed to be. Like, it's the Marvel movies have this too, where it's like, they have to tell their story, but they also have to make sure they're setting up the next big thing. And it's like, just let it be its own story. Just like, please, 1 second. But everybody wants these connected universes now, so, like, you kind of have to do that, and I feel like sometimes it works great, and sometimes it's to the detriment of, like, whatever story you were trying to tell when you have to shove in, like, a commercial for the next movie.
Yeah, I think what some people get kind of lost in the weeds with this whole universe that was set up with Man of Steel is that it after Man of Steel, they had crafted a 5-film arc for Superman, and so they were actually driving towards something. And I think if we had gotten to that final culmination of what it was, I think people would have really liked it, because it would have been a full journey for Superman. And to me, as a Superman fan, that would have been so awesome. Like it would have been such an epic story. But I think it's a different um strategy from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I guess they were still building up to a story, but that took what, 20 movies or something. Like, this was going to take 5, like
Yeah.
this was going to be just its own. It wasn't necessarily about like a sequel to a sequel to a sequel to a sequel. It was like, we're trying to tell a story, which in my opinion, films are not episodic television. Like, I kind of wish. What I like about Man of Steel is that it feels like a film. Like, there's
Yeah.
a beginning and a middle and an end. There's no post-credit sequences. There's
I
nothing.
know. I went
It's
to look for
just
the
a film.
post-credit, and I was like, "Is there no post-credit?
Yeah,
What?
that's the way a film should
The
be.
movie just ends?" Everything has a post-credit now, even movies that don't need them.
So I think there's, I mean, there's obviously a valid criticism because Marvel had a successful formula, but I think they were just trying to do something different. And I think if people had actually seen the full thing, my guess is that they would have finally understood it. But anyway, but I think Man of Steel set up the world of DC Comics pretty well. And so I just wish we had gotten more of Henry Cavill Superman.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I like Henry Cavill. I liked him in The Tudors, which is before this movie what I knew him from. And I was like, "Oh, the hot guy from The Tudors is Superman? Sweet." But I liked him in that. I liked obviously he's great in The Witcher. I thought he was a really good Superman. I thought he was like good casting for Superman. I wish that they had let him have like a little bit more lighter moments definitely in this movie. But that's probably my one critique. I thought he was like I thought he was a really good Superman. I thought like obviously he looks like he's not real. Like he's a CGI rendering of a man. So like sometimes when they would do the close-ups, I was like, how is this guy real? This is wild.
He put in a lot of work to look like that.
Yeah, I feel like that man was just living on protein shakes and and a dream. But yeah, he did a good for him.
Yeah, he
paid
he
off.
did it.
Yeah, I would say my other big critique that like kind of hadn't changed from my 2013 viewing is I don't love that he had to kill Zod. I get narratively why they did it. And I get like in the movie, I also would have killed Zod, like, but I'm not like that great of a person. So you shouldn't judge it by what I would do. But I feel like, Superman is such a symbol of hope. And even in this movie, he's like, I believe in the people and I have to get out there and kind of show them, who they can be. They talk a lot about him as a symbol. And I just kind of felt like I don't mind the idea of Superman having to kill. I wish it wasn't in like the first movie in his like in like the Henry Cavill Superman. Like it just feels like a weird, it's a little bit of a harsh introduction to the character to have him kill on like the first outing, especially after all the destruction that just happened. I feel like, maybe one or the other. We have like it earlier in the movie, he has like a nightmare where he's like sinking into a field of skulls, which is his rock band cover, obviously.
Yeah, that's a great goth band.
Oh no. Superman in the field of skulls. But it kind of comes to pass by the end of it, like Metropolis is not okay at the end of this movie. the moment where Superman and Lois kiss, I didn't like it in the 2013 viewing. I still went, "Oh." Like, you know
There
what? The timing of this, guys, is not great. It's not ideal. Jenny's like, "Oh, all of our coworkers are dead," and they're, like, smooching in the corner while the ashes of the city rain down around them. I was like, "Guys, read the room."
Yeah, I don't mind that criticism. I do have a criticism. The only thing I would critique about this film is that there's a line of dialogue that is exchanged but before they kiss.
Uh-huh.
And I hate that dialogue so much because it doesn't make any sense. And the way that it's spoken to Lois, I think
Mhm.
they didn't really think that line of dialogue
I don't
through.
remember what they said.
It's something about I forget what it is exactly. They say it all goes downhill after the first kiss.
Oh,
And
yes, that
she says that to him, and then he says, "That's only if you're kissing a human." And I'm like, "Dummy, you're kissing a human."
he's
Like
like, "So this is gonna be the best I'm gonna get from you, but"
yeah, it's like, "This is the best you're gonna ever get, but I might have some better options." Like, like, it does that line of dialogue makes no sense. It's dumb, and if it had been me like, I don't mind the kiss.
Yeah.
I have a problem with the dialogue. Like,
Yeah.
have them kiss and just don't say anything. That's a better way to play.
I think that would have played out a little bit better for me as well. I also think if it was, more of, them being like, "Oh my god, we just, went through something," and then they, kiss really dramatically, I think the dialogue does undercut the scene, and I also think, when they pull out and you see all the destruction around them, and then they're just kinda macking on each other, you just go, "Ooh, was now the time and the
Yeah.
place for this, you guys, or could we maybe have done this later?"
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I think that's a fair critique, and the Zod killing thing, I think, that's obviously a big problem that a lot of people have with this film. I remember when I first saw it in theaters, and when it happened, I immediately thought, "Well, a lot of people are going to hate this."
Yeah, yeah.
I knew immediately that was, and I even sort of bristled at it when it happened. But the moment that he lets out that big guttural scream, that made it okay for me because
Yeah.
it was like he didn't wanna do it, he had to do it, and I know people say, "Well, they could have written it differently, they could have not put him in the situation," but it was an intentional choice to put him in that situation and make him have to make a tough choice. Because again, in my opinion, the entire film is about free will and free choice, and for him to have to make that choice, that's an important part of the storyline for him. So I don't mind it. I get why people have a problem with it, but pretty much the only time Superman has ever really killed, to my knowledge, there's probably other instances. Um,
I feel like Silver Age Superman was just walking around,
and
knocking people off buildings and stuff.
Golden Age Superman was roughing people up all the time. But it's mostly General Zod that he kills.
Yeah,
He's killed
yeah.
General Zod in the comics. He killed General Zod in the Donnerverse. In Doomsday, when he kills Doomsday and BBS, they kind of kill each other. That's in the comics too. So that's, to me, it's grounded in comic book mythology, and that's why I'm kind of like, I don't care as much because I see where it comes from. But I can see why people have an issue with it, and it's a fair criticism. But I think more than not, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think that was I remember back in when it came out, that was the big criticism I think of the movie. The two big criticisms I think were that people didn't like that Superman had to kill somebody, and that they didn't like that sort of I would say having just watched it, maybe the last 30 minutes where it was just them fighting through buildings, building after building after building, and I think you do kind of get a destruction fatigue almost, where you're just like, "Oh my god, stop." So I think a little bit of that giant fight could have been cut down. But yeah, I think those are the two critiques. I still kind of agree with, even 10 years out. I felt that way when I got out of the movie and I was like, "Oh, I don't like it." And I felt that way after I watched the movie last night and I was like, "Hey, that wasn't bad. I had a good time." But I was still I still don't love the killing thing, and
Yeah, yeah,
the destruction was still a little too much.
that's
Not
fair.
that none of these not that these movies don't tend to do that. I think this was just a scale issue where it became All right.
Well,
all
I
right.
think it's more so it's not so in my opinion, it's not so much the destruction, it's showing the real world consequences of what that destruction would look like. 'Cause, I went to see Shazam 2 recently.
Mhm.
Holy crap, there's a lot of destruction in that movie, but you never hear anybody talk about that. The Avengers movie, the Hulk runs through an office building full of people in full Hulk mode. And there's, like, jokes made about, like,
Those
nobody
people
cares.
aren't okay.
No, people don't care about that kind of stuff. So I think it's just because, in my opinion, I think that the reason Man of Steel gets a lot of that brunt is because there's actually it feels real. With the Avengers, with the Hulk running through an office, it's like a cartoon. Shazam 2, it's kind of like cartoonish. Oh, they have dragons and they're destroying everything.
Oh no.
Um, so it's like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel real, but with Man of Steel, it's treated intentionally as what if this was real? Because the whole premise of Snyder's Superman is let's make a film like if Superman existed in the real world, what would that be like? So I think the fact that there are real consequences to that, I think is what makes it jarring for people because they're used to that kind of I hate to say this, but like kind of cartoony violence.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is a little bit more realistic, and so it is a little bit more jarring where, like, you suddenly start thinking like, "Oh, a lot of people in that building are definitely dead." Like, definitely they are dead. Whereas, like, yeah, in some of the Marvel movies where they're fighting, they'll, like, save one person, you're like, "What about everybody else in that building?" But, yeah, it is a little bit more, like, heightened reality in a lot of these superhero movies, whereas I do feel like Man of Steel was trying to keep it a lot more realistic. And I do think that the way that they kind of treat the idea of Superman is like, what if there was this guy and he could do all of these things and like wouldn't that be a little scary? And I thought that that actually is kind of is an interesting take on the character too, because like I've watched the Amazon, I think it's on Amazon, the Amazon show The Boys, which is like this
I've heard a
idea.
lot of people talk about that. I've never watched it
This
though.
is I like the idea of like, what if all the superheroes that like the Flash and Superman and Wonder Woman, what if they all were kind of terrible people? Like, wouldn't that be kind of insane? Wouldn't that be terrifying? And like the idea is like obviously Clark as Superman is not crazy. But there I do think that these movies kind of plant the idea of like, but if he was, this would be a real problem for everybody. Like, they take that pretty seriously, I think.
And that's paired with General Zod because when he first appears and outs himself, he's scary.
Yeah.
It's shot like a horror film with the creaking farm door and the lights
Oh,
cutting
that was
off
really cool.
and
I like that.
the message coming up out of nowhere. So General Zod is the negative of that. What if this super powered Kryptonian being came to Earth? That would be a negative experience if it was General Zod. But contrasted to him, Superman is actually kind of a benevolent person in a super suit who flies around in a cape. So I think that to me that's a pretty cool idea. Is like treating it as if it really. I think sometimes in the comics it's been treated like I think what is that comic? Superman Earth 1 I
Mhm.
think is the one where it sort of treats it as a first encounter story.
Ooh.
But that's the only kind of other version that I know of in the comics where it's treated as like Superman is an alien. So that's what I like about this is that it sort of takes that more sci-fi approach to Superman with aliens and alien encounters and things like that.
So I had a question that I jotted down in my notes. You might not be able to answer this. This is very weird. Jax Orr, who is the actor? Have I seen him before? Which obviously you can answer. And had that character been in the comics?
Yes, actually, Jack Sore is a
It was
famous
very familiar to
Kryptonian.
me, the
Um,
name.
So Jack Sore appeared in Adventure Comics number 289 in October 1961, co-created by
Mhm.
Otto Bender, one of the co-creators of a Supergirl. So Jack Sore has been around for quite a long time. He's described on Wikipedia as an amoral and criminally deviant deviant scientist on the planet Krypton. He was in the Phantom Zone for a little bit. So he's kind of a criminal. He's a science criminal from Krypton. Jack Sawyer is also on Sci-Fi's Krypton. You got to watch Krypton. It's
Ah.
great. It's great. But
I just saw Hannah I'll never get her name right. Wallingham from Lasso is in
yes,
Krypton.
she plays Jack Sawyer.
What?
If I remember correctly, they gender bent Jack Sawyer.
Twist.
Yeah, she's great on Krypton. We've got to do some stuff.
We
about
gotta
Krypton.
watch Krypton now.
I
I looked up the actor who plays Jack Sawyer. His name is Mackenzie Gray. He is a Canadian actor. I cannot for the life of me understand where I know this man from. It's like one of those things where it's like on the tip of my tongue. Like I can almost see the movie that he was in. Like I can see him in the role, and I'm like, what is it? It's gonna haunt me for maybe the rest of my life because I've clearly seen something with him in it. He's got a very distinctive like face. Like I feel like he's been in like horror movie stuff before.
yeah, you do watch a lot of those.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably what it is. Like I kind of see him in it's never going to come to me. Although apparently he was in an episode of Legends of Tomorrow. But that's definitely not what I'm remembering, which is the funny thing. I'm like, I got to Legends of Tomorrow and I was like, is it that? And I was like, no, it's definitely not. What is it? I'll never know.
Yeah, so I don't know what you know him from, but Jack Sawyer is a pretty famous Kryptonian from the comics, having done a lot of criminal things. So it's fitting that Jack Sawyer is a pal of General Zod.
Man, this guy's been working forever, and none of the stuff is the stuff I feel like I'm remembering. I'm gonna wake up in the middle of the night tonight, and I'm gonna be like, "That's it." But it will do me no good in any aspect of my life. Like
you'll have to
most of the
report back.
knowledge I have, I will report back whenever I remember what it is that I've seen this guy in. But A+ for him. He made an impression. Okay, my last question.
Okay.
And I'm gonna read it from my notes because I remember that these are great notes. All the codex in Clark's jeans? ? That's weird. If you can answer that question.
So that is a different take on the Kryptonian mythology. I think it's really interesting that in addition to sending little baby Kal-El off in the pod, Jor-El is literally sending him off with their Kryptonian culture embedded in his DNA. I think that's actually a really cool idea. There's Zack Snyder had talked about in the past that like that skull that Jor-El goes up and gets so that he can sort of melt it down into the little sparkly bits that go into Kal-El. That is actually, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, but I think that's the skull of like the first Kryptonian. So that's like their literal heritage and their history and their culture embedded in that skull. So I think it's a really neat idea. I know it sounds pretty crazy that like all of their like Kryptonian stuff goes into him. It's kind of a wild idea, but I think it's actually pretty cool that he carries Krypton with him everywhere he goes. I think that's a really cool idea.
That is really cool. I have an update on Jack Sawyer.
Oh, I'm excited.
It's an unexpected update, and I still gotta be honest, don't think this is the thing I'm remembering. But it turns out he was on an episode of Supergirl.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
What? Okay, all right. What's his character's name?
Let me find it. Gregor. He was in one episode in 2017. So, not sure what that episode was about.
Huh. Okay.
It looks like it was Crisis on Earth X, Part 1. Oh my God, maybe this is where I know him from. Because I feel like he would be a villain, right?
Yeah, okay. Huh. I wish I could pull a picture up of him.
Yeah, me too.
Huh.
He played Gregor. You remember Gregor, right? The most important character in Crisis on Earth X.
We'll have to go back through and look at that and see what we can find. That's a really funny find. Actually, the General Zod that's in Supergirl at the end of season 2, where Superman and Supergirl fight each other because Superman thinks that Supergirl is actually General Zod. I don't know if you remember that big fight. The guy who plays Zod is actually in Man of Steel.
Oh, really?
So
Small
there's
world.
a lot of
So there's a
connections
lot
back
of-
and forth. And
It's
I'm sure you recognized the guy who was helping Dr. Hamilton, the
I
military guy.
I did, but why did I recognize him?
Because
It was haunting me.
he played Dr. Hamilton on Smallville.
On Smallville, right? Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Every time they were like talking to Dr. Hamilton, I was like, why isn't this guy answering? I don't understand. I think he was also in Battlestar Galactica.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, I obviously this filmed in Canada somewhere because the Canadian actors are like ripe in this. Like you can't turn around without bumping into a Canadian actor.
Yeah, a lot of this some of this was filmed in Illinois.
Oh,
I
interesting.
don't know where all the locations are, but some of the Smallville stuff was in Illinois. Yeah. So lots of Smallvillian connections,
So my last question, final question,
including Amy Adams as Smallville.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Amy Adams was in Smallville. One of her best roles as the fat sucking girl. Not joking. That's always a fun one to pull out of parties. Did you know that Amy Adams was in Smallville? She like sucked the fat out of things. It was a great show.
Yeah. So your final question.
My final question is, what Man of Steel stuff have you seen? Have you noticed in the Flash promos? Like, how do you think it might connect?
This is a good question because this is the whole reason that we're doing this. So the Flash movie trailers seem to be depicting Zod coming in the military. So in Man of Steel, there's like a military sequence where Superman's standing. I guess it's actually, if you're watching the video, he's standing in front of the military, and Zod. He's actually going to meet General Zod for the first time, and they pick. Superman and Lois go up into the ship, and then they do Kryptonian experiments on them. So it seems like it's maybe around that sequence with the military. But because it seems like there's no Superman, but there's a Supergirl. I'm trying, I don't know how that's going to be changed or different.
Interesting. I wonder if since this whole movie is about like alternate realities, I wonder if we'll see some Man of Steel stuff, but it'll be Supergirl instead of Superman.
It sort of seems like that. There's also a shot of the World Engine sort of picking up cars and like terraforming the Earth. That's also appeared in Flash movie trailers. And I think the visual effects guy who worked on Man of Steel, DJ Desjardins, who was at the Full Circle event, actually, really funny, awesome guy, by the way. He also, I think, worked on the Flash movie because they needed him in order to make those sequences different. So, yeah, I think they're gonna pull some of these sequences and do something different with them. But I kind of wanted to make sure I revisited it and wanted to, since we were going to talk about the Flash movie, I was like, well, if Morgan hadn't seen this in 10 years.
I haven't seen it in 10 years. There was
no way a refresher.
There's no way I was remembering. Like, I didn't remember that they were on Krypton for 20 minutes. I was like, Krypton? Don't mind if I do. So, yeah, that I would have been very confused about the visual references. I would have been like, what's that supposed to be?
Yeah, because there's General Zod with his full armor on. So I don't know what Zod is doing in the movie, but it seems like Zod and Supergirl are
button heads.
Yeah, button heads. Like
interesting.
She might know him or something. I don't know. But it seems like they're recreating some of these Man of Steel sequences for some reason.
I'm excited for when our lives change when we see this movie. And I think we're prepared for it now.
And now we're ready to go. Now we are refreshed, and now we can see it for a new viewing and see how somebody else interprets it, I guess. Okay, well, I think that's going to do it for our thoughts on Man of Steel. Thank you, Morgan, for indulging me. I know this was not something that you initially wanted to do, probably.
I was like, do we have to? But it turned out that I had a good time watching the movie. So it all turned out well in the end.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So thank you for being a good sport and watching a movie that you didn't originally like.
And now I'm prepared for the greatest film of all time.
I'm excited about it because now my expectations are really high. So
Jaden loved it.
Jaden loved it, so it must be delivering on all cylinders. All right, well, before we get out of here, maybe we can make a few Man of Steel Snap Judgments. In the game of Snap Judgments, each person is presented with 2 options, but must only choose one. First instincts are recommended, and explanations are unnecessary.
Okay. So, what is your preferred method of fighting General Zod? Using a Kryptonian weapon and guided by Jor-El's AI, or telling General Zod to go to hell?
Just like Martha Kent, one of the coolest Martha Kent, one of the coolest Martha Kent moments ever in the history of Martha Kent. I would love to shoot a Kryptonian weapon. I think telling General Zod to go to hell is going to get you choked a little bit.
It's not going to go great for you, probably.
Yeah. So I'd like to maybe go to space and shoot some Kryptonian weapons.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Kryptonian weapon as well. Also, that Jor-El AI seems really fun. I'd like to just hang out with him and just be like, "What's up?" And he'd be like, "I'm telling you to shoot the weapon." And I'm like, "Yeah, but like, what's your planet like? What, did you name the little dragon guy? What was his name? What did he like to eat?" So I'd probably also die, but like I would have like a fun conversation.
He would get so frustrated.
He'd be like, "Just shoot it."
No judgments on your Snap Judgments. All right, and now it's time to get to some DC TV podcasts and Supergirl Radio plugs. If you would like to contact Supergirl Radio, you can post a comment on our website at supergirlradio.com. You can email us at supergirlradio@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can call us at 678-718-7252. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram, all at Supergirl Radio. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Podchaser, and Spotify, where we also have a Spotify playlist that includes music featured on and inspired by the CW's Supergirl TV series. We are listed on DC's fan page, which you can find at dccomics.com/DC-fans. If you like what we do, we encourage you to give us a rating and write us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy our Supergirl Radio live streams, make sure to subscribe to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to get notified when we go live and wired. DC TV Podcast also has a TeePublic store, so if you're in need of new DC TV related t-shirts, tank tops, sweatshirts, onesies, mugs, notebooks, pillows, or stickers, go to supergirlradio.com and click on the TeePublic store link at the top of the page.
Hello, and thank you for calling the DC TV Podcast hotline. Please listen carefully as some of our menu options have changed. Supergirl Radio? Press 1. The Flash Podcast? Press 2. Legends of Tomorrow Podcast? Press 3. The Lithuanian Room? Press 4. DC on HBO Max Podcast? Press 5. Stargirl Podcast? Press 6. Superman and Lois Radio? Press 7. Green Lantern Podcast? Press 8. The Sandman Podcast? Press 9. Justice League Dark Podcast? Press 10. DC After Dark? Press 11. For all other inquiries, please stay on the line and the next available agent will be with you shortly.
And since we talked about Man of Steel, we have some designs in the TeePublic store we'd like to suggest.
Yeah, there's a t-shirt in there that I like that says, just directed by Zack Snyder. And so I would like to, I wear it sometimes thinking, yeah, my life is directed by Zack Snyder. I'd like to believe that. And there's also a t-shirt in there in the same vein as, sort of showing film credits where it says music by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL, which I think is pretty fun. Because Hans Zimmer made one of the best film scores ever with Man of Steel. That's probably something people might disagree with, but not hyperbole. I think it's one of the best ones ever ever recorded and composed. So I wish
Hans
more people
Zimmer is
talked-
a real one. I'll be honest. I like. I mean, he's like a great in the film composer arena, I believe.
He's my favorite. I know people are like, yeah, John Williams. I'm like, but Hans Zimmer. That's my guy. So I love Hans Zimmer's score. So we have a T-shirt in there that you can represent his score he does with Junkie XL.
I will say
Or-
one of my favorite scores of all time is a Hans Zimmer, and it's from the delightful Christmas movie, The Holiday.
Ah,
Sometimes I'll just put that on when I'm like working on something, and I'm just like delightful, like, oh, I'm in a cottage in England now.
he has a wide variety of things. He did Pirates of the Caribbean. He did Gladiator. He did Inception and Interstellar, all the kind of the Nolan films, the Dark Knight trilogy, the Lion King. I'm trying to think of some other things. I'm like blanking on. He did Megamind. Megamind has an underrated score. One of my top 5 comic book related films. But anyway, so Hans Zimmer, great. Everyone should listen to his stuff. I'll have to check out The Holiday. I don't listen to it much, so
It's a great one. It's one of my favorite. It's so random too. It's like one of my favorite film scores. I like The Holiday. I wouldn't say it's like one of my all-time favorite movies, but the film score is like straight fire. So I put it on a lot, and I'm just like I need to like concentrate. It's like it's kind of calming, but it's got like a nice beat to it.
okay.
I also think I saw. Speaking about Hans Zimmer, I don't know if maybe he was at this. I can't remember. A couple of years ago, I was in London and we decided to go. My mom and I were in London. We decided to go randomly to see like a show, and we saw a salute to Michael Caine.
Oh,
which was really cool.
was he there?
And
Michael
I think Michael Caine was there, and he would come out, he would talk about his life and his career, and then they would show like clips from his movies, and then they would sometimes have like special, messages from his friends and stuff like that. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I think that Hans Zimmer came out and played the theme from Inception on the piano during.
He probably played that time track, which always that's
Yeah,
so beautiful. Yeah. Oh man, I'm jealous.
Well, somebody played that track on the piano, and it was
probably was Hans
amazing.
Zimmer.
I think it was Hans Zimmer, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" It was funny because I was like, "Let's go see like a show while we're in London." They've got like great stuff, and there wasn't like we went to see a West End show, which was great. We saw Bring Up the Bodies, which is one of the Wolf Hall, like Anne Boleyn, Thomas Cromwell plays, which was fantastic. And then I was like, well, like, let's see what else is going on while we're there. And I saw a salute to Michael Caine. I turned around, I was like, do you want to go see Michael Caine? So which is amazing. It wasn't super expensive, and so we went and we saw it, and it was like crazy. It was really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I always think of that when I think of Hans Zimmer. I'd like, oh yeah, that's right. Like at the very least, I might be a liar in saying that he was out there playing the piano, but they did play the theme from Inception, and I was like, man, that music's good.
I'm pretty sure it was him because that seems like something he would do. He notably is in the first music video ever aired on MTV.
He's in Video Killed the Radio Star?
Mm-hmm. He's the keyboardist in that.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's amazing. I did not. That's a fun fact I'm pulling out. Guess what? Guess who's got a Hans Zimmer fun fact?
I could talk about Hans Zimmer all the time because for Man of Steel, he based a lot of his. He actually did two really unique things. He had a lot of percussion, which is not normally in a Superman theme. There's a lot of horns traditionally, but he gathered like, I don't know how many of the best drummers in the entire world, and he got them all in a room together, and they made up these beats. There's like behind the scenes stuff on the Water Tower Music YouTube channel that people can check out. But if you hear the oil rig sequence, there's a lot of drums in that. He literally had gotten the best drummers in the world together to do that.
Whoa.
And then he also he created his Clark Kent theme around piano and slide guitar because he was trying to think of things that were like musically like kind of Americana, and so the
Mhm.
guitar is what he sort of. It was interesting to hear him talk about because he's not American. He's I think he's German. But the way he talked about America and the way he thinks about America, it just was such a neat thing to hear him speak on that. But all of the sounds, he had created all these sounds off slide guitars and recorded them and had the slide guitarist do these like cool sliding things, and he would record like a sound library so that he could like play it on a keyboard. He could play it
Whoa.
to do whatever he wanted. Hans Zimmer is like the coolest composer who's ever lived. He's just like he's the coolest. He is an amazing genius. So I'm gonna stop talking about Hans Zimmer because that could go on too too long. But I'll link all the videos that I'm talking about in the video description below, and also in the audio podcast show notes because everybody needs to see them. I hope it would give people more appreciation for the score because there's really well thought out. Well, anyway, let's thank our Legion of Super sponsors for supporting the Supergirl Radio Patreon. These people are Michael, Anne Marie, Yvonne, Quinn, Nicola, Abby, Miriam, Nicole, Brian, Ethan, Danny, Tara, and Majuba. If you would like to also do that, you can go to patreon.com/Supergirl Radio. And if you want to keep up with me, you can do that a couple of ways. You can follow me on Vero True Social at Derby Kid. I'm on Instagram at The Derby Kid. I'm also on YouTube at youtube.com/DuckMoProd. So if you want to subscribe and check me out there, you can.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Mojotastic. And you can also find me as a co-host on the Legendary Lady podcast, formerly the Legends of Tomorrow podcast, where we've got like a pretty good slate of stuff that we're going to talk about, including, I believe, the Flash finale, which should be fun because none of us have watched in a very long time. So we're going to watch the finale. And we're just going to check in and be like, how did we think it ended with like almost no
context?
Because Amy used to be on the Flash podcast,
right?
She used to actively podcast about the Flash, and she hasn't watched it in several seasons. So I think it'll be fun to get her perspective on like how she thinks that the show ended, having been like so involved in talking about it for so long.
Interesting. I can't wait for that.
It's also very important for me to issue a correction that I have figured out where I know Jacks are from. This was haunting me, and I'm sure it was haunting.
It wasn't Gregor from Crisis on
It wasn't Gregor from. It's more esoteric than that. It turns out it is from a horror movie. So I was right. Called Grave Encounters.
Wow.
Which is like a found footage horror movie that I found on Netflix one day and became one of my favorite horror movies because it is like, if you've ever watched those ghost hunter shows, like that's on like Discovery and stuff like that, or Travel Channel, where they go in, it's like one hardcore guy and like his like group of people, and they like pose a lot, and then they like go into the houses and they like scream at the ghost. They're like, show yourself, coward. This is like, what if there were actual ghosts in the thing that they went to see, and what if like the ghosts start like killing them. And it's a fun movie. It's a fun horror movie. It's like an hour and a half. It's like a tight 90-minute horror movie. It's found footage, so if you don't like found footage, you probably won't like it. It's like mostly like it's the cameras that they all have, because they have a camera crew and they have cameras set up, and then you see like the creepy stuff, and they're in like an old asylum or something like that like the inside starts changing on them. It's fun. It's got a little bit of a House of Leaves feeling to it. It's a very quality Netflix movie that you would find maybe at some point in spooky season. And so it was haunting me because he plays like the paranormal investigator or something that's always like, oh, I can feel the spirits in here. And then they like pretend like and then like the cut is done and he's like, all right guys, let's get lunch. like complete, like it's complete BS to him until things start like actually happening.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh God, I know this guy from somewhere. Like he's got like one of those faces, like you wouldn't forget it because it's very unique. And I was like, once I was scrolling down his Wikipedia, I was like, that's it, Grave Encounters. So it doesn't, I can sleep tonight now, knowing that I know where I know him from.
Well, I'm glad we solved that riddle.
I knew the listeners needed to know.
Oh, that is so good. Well, I'm glad that we reconnected with Jaxor and figured that out. Okay, well, that is going to do it for this episode of Supergirl Radio. But until next time, I'm still Rebecca Johnson.
And I'm still Morgan Glennon, and we'd like to welcome you to the planet.
McGurk! I love
Not
typing.
mess with my Google Docs, Meeksy.
Supergirl Radio is going live every night of the week. How do you like it? Is becoming a human burrito a plus or a minus? I don't know. It does seem snug.
I mean, they say you are what you eat.
I love that.
So I do a podcast called Supergirl Radio, and one of our segments is Lena Luthor, Boardroom or Ballroom, because her outfit,
She looks like a boss in this coat.
Nasty Luthor like a different Luthor? It's not just Lena being mean?
No.
Helen Slater here. So fun to know that you're hosting a podcast called Supergirl Radio.
Yeah!